Police say they've dismantled one of the most significant drug organizations.
Two-year investigation has now taken down a major drug trafficking operation.
Before sunrise on December 11th, 2025, tactical teams hit 13 locations across West Palm Beach at the same time, dragging suspects out of homes and vehicles that looked quiet only hours earlier. More than 7 pounds of fentanyl, 3 pounds of cocaine, multiple synthetic drugs, 9 firearms, and nearly $179,000 in cash were seized in a single coordinated strike. 8 senior leaders were arrested on racketeering charges, along with more than 25 street-level dealers, collapsing a drug network that had fueled overdoses across Palm Beach County. This was not a routine drug bust, but the final blow in a 2-year investigation designed to break an organization from the top down. Subscribe to Military Power to follow how this operation unfolded step by step, because the story behind these arrests is far bigger than the numbers alone. Operation Old School began in June 2023, when the steady rise in fentanyl deaths across West Palm Beach stopped being a statistic and became an emergency that law enforcement could no longer ignore. Emergency rooms were reporting overdoses at a pace that strained medical staff, and patrol officers were responding to scenes that followed the same grim pattern of small packets, quiet apartments, and lives lost too quickly. These cases showed no sign of slowing, which indicated to investigators that a structured supply chain was fueling the streets rather than random dealers acting alone. For the West Palm Beach Police Department leadership, the situation demanded a response that went beyond short-term arrests and visible patrols. What emerged was a deliberate plan targeting the source of the flow, rather than just its surface effects. The first step was recognizing that the problem crossed city lines and agency limits, so West Palm Beach Police reached out to partners with experience in complex drug cases. FDLE analysts joined early meetings to examine trends, while the DEA brought federal insight into trafficking methods and drug sourcing. The U.S. Marshal Service brought expertise in tracking suspects who frequently moved and avoided arrest, while the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office provided local reach across neighborhoods and unincorporated areas. Together, these agencies formed a joint task structure that enabled real-time intelligence sharing and unified investigative vision. The operation was later given a name that reflected its focus on dismantling long-standing criminal behavior rather than chasing headlines. From the outset, Operation Old School was designed to expose the whole structure of a drug organization that had learned how to survive enforcement pressure. Investigators were not satisfied with identifying street sellers who could be replaced within days. Their goal was to understand who gave orders, who handled money, and who controlled distribution routes that fed fentanyl and other drugs into West Palm Beach. This required patience, because every arrest risked alerting higher-level figures and pushing the network deeper underground. The team agreed early that time would be their most valuable tool, even if it meant delaying visible results. As weeks turned into months, special investigative units settled into a pattern of quiet observation. Detectives tracked suspected leaders by observing their daily routines, noting meeting locations, travel habits, and communication methods. They watched as individuals moved between homes, parking lots, and businesses, often using short visits to limit exposure. Patterns began to emerge that suggested clear roles within the organization, separating decision-makers from those tasked with street-level sales. This work was slow and required discipline, since a single mistake could unravel months of progress. Alongside leadership surveillance, investigators focused on mapping the network of distributors that connected supply to users. These individuals operated as the visible face of the organization, yet they rarely acted independently. Detectives documented how products were passed down in small quantities, limiting losses if a seller was arrested. They observed how payments flowed upward through trusted intermediaries rather than directly to leaders. This structure demonstrated planning and experience, confirming that the network was designed to withstand pressure and continue operating even under intense scrutiny from law enforcement. Technology played a critical role during this phase, but it was used carefully to avoid detection. Analysts examined call records, financial transactions, and travel data to identify individuals who rarely appeared together in public. Surveillance teams worked closely with prosecutors to ensure that every piece of evidence met the legal standards of admissibility. The goal was not only to demonstrate that crimes occurred, but also to prove that they were part of an organized effort directed by identifiable leaders. Each connection added another line to a growing map of the organization. The decision to pursue racketeering charges shaped how evidence was gathered and preserved. RICO cases require proof of an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated acts, which means investigators must demonstrate continuity and coordination among the alleged participants. Detectives documented repeated behaviors, consistent supply methods, and shared resources across the network. This approach required restraint, since quick arrests could satisfy public pressure, but weaken the larger case. By committing to a long-term strategy, the task force accepted the risk that the network would continue to operate while evidence was being gathered. Throughout the investigation, coordination between agencies remained constant and methodical. Weekly briefings allowed teams to share updates, adjust priorities, and avoid overlapping efforts. Differences in jurisdiction were managed through clear agreements that defined roles and responsibilities. This structure prevented gaps that criminal groups often exploit when agencies work in isolation. Over time, trust within the task force grew, making it easier to act decisively when the moment came. The human cost of the investigation was never far from the minds of those involved. Detectives reviewed overdose reports that underscored why the operation mattered beyond professional success. Each case reinforced the urgency of dismantling the organization rather than settling for temporary disruption. This awareness helped maintain focus during long periods when progress felt invisible to the public. It also strengthened the resolve to see the operation through to its conclusion. By the end of the first year, the task force had identified a clear hierarchy within the network. Leaders were linked to multiple distributors, and financial flows pointed to centralized control. These findings validated the decision to invest time and resources into a comprehensive case. Still, investigators resisted pressure to move too quickly, knowing that a partial takedown could leave the core intact. The second year of the investigation was devoted to confirming these links and filling remaining gaps. As Operation Old School entered its final months, evidence collection intensified without breaking the quiet pattern that had defined the case. Surveillance teams continued their work, while analysts refined timelines and connections. Prosecutors reviewed materials to ensure that charges would withstand scrutiny in court. Every step was taken with the understanding that the outcome would shape how future drug cases were handled in West Palm Beach. The operation had grown beyond a response to rising fentanyl deaths and had become a model for confronting organized crime. If you have thoughts on how communities should respond to organized drug networks like this one, please share your perspective in the comments below, as public awareness remains a crucial part of the fight. With the organization's structure mapped and evidence secured, the investigation was ready to transition from observation to action, setting the stage for the coordinated operations that followed. December 8, 2025, arrived without warning for the people tied to the drug network. But for law enforcement, it was the endpoint of months of preparation and quiet control. Before sunrise, coordinated teams from multiple agencies moved into position across West Palm Beach and surrounding areas. Each unit assigned a specific target that had been studied for weeks. 13 search warrants were scheduled to be served simultaneously, a decision made to prevent communication and escape within the organization. Streets that usually carried early morning traffic were slowly sealed off, and marked vehicles took visible positions, while unmarked units held back until the final signal. The operation was designed to unfold in minutes, not hours, leaving no room for confusion or delay. At the center of the plan was precise coordination between agencies that rarely operate together at this scale. Command posts monitored real-time updates as teams advanced toward residences, stash locations, and suspected distribution points. Officers moved in tight formations, weapons ready but controlled, trained to secure entrances quickly and clear rooms with minimal movement. Radios stayed active with short commands that confirmed progress at each location. The sound of doors opening and voices calling out orders echoed across different neighborhoods simultaneously, creating a sense of sudden pressure that the organization could not outrun. Law enforcement vehicles filled the streets near the targets, their presence sending a clear message to anyone watching from a distance. Patrol cars blocked intersections while tactical vans provided cover for entry teams. Flashing lights reflected off windows as officers established perimeters, ensuring that no one could enter or leave the secured zones. This visible show of force was not meant to intimidate the public, but to control the environment and reduce risk. Every movement followed a rehearsed pattern built to protect both officers and residents. Inside the targeted locations, teams moved quickly to secure suspects and prevent the destruction of evidence. Individuals were ordered to the ground, searched, and restrained before they could react. Officers checked the rooms methodically, calling out clear signals as each area was secured. The pace was fast, but discipline remained strict, reflecting the extensive training that had led up to the moment. Each location followed the same process, ensuring consistency across all 13 sites. As arrests were made, evidence teams began their work almost immediately. Packets of drugs were recovered from hidden compartments, closets, and vehicles parked nearby. Digital devices and documents were seized for later analysis, while the cash was counted and logged on site. Firearms were secured and unloaded, then marked as evidence. The scenes showed how deeply the organization had embedded itself into everyday spaces, blending criminal operations with ordinary living conditions. By the time the operation concluded, the scale of the takedown became clear. 8 senior figures within the organization were taken into custody and charged with racketeering and conspiracy to commit racketeering, alongside more than 56 additional charges tied to their roles. These individuals were identified as leaders who directed supply, managed money, and enforced discipline within the network. Their arrests marked a direct strike at the top of the organization, removing the control that allowed the operation to function. Beyond the leadership, more than 25 retail-level distributors were arrested during the coordinated raids. These suspects faced over 50 combined charges related to drug trafficking and related offenses. Investigators viewed these arrests as necessary to disrupt the daily flow of drugs into the community. Each individual played a role in delivering fentanyl and other substances to users, forming the final link between the organization and the streets. Removing them simultaneously prevented the network from quickly replacing the losses. The physical evidence seized during the operation reflected the seriousness of the threat that had been dismantled. Approximately 7.3 pounds of fentanyl were recovered, an amount capable of causing thousands of fatal overdoses if distributed. 3 pounds of cocaine were seized, along with methamphetamine, heroin, PCP, oxycodone, Xanax, and marijuana. Each substance represented a different market within the organization, showing its reach across various drug categories. Investigators noted that the variety of drugs pointed to a business model built on flexibility and profit, rather than loyalty to a single product. Weapons and money recovered during the raids further illustrated the dangers involved. 9 firearms were seized from locations connected to the organization, some kept close to drug supplies and cash. Approximately $179,000 in cash was counted and secured, believed to be the proceeds from recent sales. Vehicles used for transportation and distribution were impounded, along with access to properties that served as operational hubs. These seizures removed tools that supported both violence and expansion. Throughout the operation, officers maintained control of the scenes while ensuring that nearby residents were kept at a safe distance. Streets remained closed until evidence was processed and suspects were transported. The presence of multiple agencies working in unison reduced the risk of miscommunication, allowing the operation to conclude without a significant incident. For many residents, the morning unfolded in confusion and concern, followed by a quiet realization that something important had just happened in their neighborhood. Once the final warrant was served and teams began to withdraw, the broader impact of the operation came into focus. The organization that had operated across West Palm Beach was no longer intact, its leadership removed and its supply chains disrupted. Law enforcement leaders described the day as the result of discipline and patience rather than chance. The coordinated nature of the raids demonstrated how complex criminal networks can be confronted when agencies commit to shared goals. As suspects were processed and evidence moved into secure storage, attention shifted toward the legal process and the community response that would follow. The arrests marked a turning point in the fight against organized drug trafficking in the area, but they also raised questions about recovery and prevention. With the immediate threat addressed, the next phase would focus on how the community and authorities would respond to the aftermath of the operation and its long-term consequences. The hours following the coordinated raids brought a different kind of tension to West Palm Beach, one that moved from the streets into public spaces and television screens across Palm Beach County. As evidence teams cleared the final locations and patrol units reopened roads, attention shifted toward the official response that many residents had been waiting to hear. News spread quickly through neighborhoods that had been affected by drug activity for years, and people searched for signs that the operation would bring lasting change. For some, the silence that followed the raids felt unfamiliar, as if the city were holding its breath. This pause set the stage for a public moment that would shape how the operation was understood. Later that day, officials gathered for a formal press conference aimed at addressing both relief and concern within the community. Cameras were positioned in front of a row of law enforcement representatives, each standing as a symbol of the joint effort behind the operation. The setting was calm and controlled, a sharp contrast to the rapid actions that had unfolded hours earlier. Reporters waited for clear answers about what had happened and what would come next. The focus of the event was reassurance rather than celebration. West Palm Beach, Police Chief Tony Araujo spoke with a measured tone that reflected the seriousness of the moment. He emphasized that the operation was guided by a commitment to protect residents rather than chase recognition. His message centered on restoring safety to neighborhoods that had carried the burden of drug-related crime. By highlighting the coordination between agencies, he reinforced the idea that the city was not facing this challenge alone. The chief made it clear that sustained effort would follow the arrests, signaling that enforcement would remain active. The Palm Beach County State Attorney followed with remarks that framed the operation as a turning point for local security. He described the case as a clear example of how organized crime could be confronted through patience and legal precision. Rather than focusing solely on arrests, he stressed the importance of dismantling entire networks to prevent rapid replacement. His words carried weight for residents who had seen previous cases fade without long-term impact. This framing positioned the operation as a shift toward deeper accountability. Throughout the press conference, officials avoided dramatic language and instead focused on responsibility and continuity. They explained that the charges filed were the result of extensive evidence gathering and careful review. This approach was intended to reassure the public that the case would proceed with strength in court. The emphasis on process underscored the seriousness of the effort and its potential to hold leaders accountable. For many observers, this calm confidence was as necessary as the arrests themselves. Beyond official statements, the reaction among residents revealed a complex mix of emotions. In neighborhoods that had experienced frequent drug activity, people expressed a sense of relief that had been missing for years. Parents spoke about feeling safer, letting children play outside, while local business owners noted a decrease in visible dealing. At the same time, there was an awareness that one operation could not erase years of damage. This cautious optimism reflected lived experience rather than abstract hope. Community members also shared lingering concerns about addiction and its reach. Many residents understood that removing suppliers did not immediately address demand or recovery. Stories circulated about families still struggling with loss and uncertainty despite the recent arrests. These voices served as a reminder that enforcement is only one part of a broader challenge. The operation had disrupted the supply, but healing would take longer. Local organizations and neighborhood groups responded by renewing calls for prevention and education. They viewed the operation as an opportunity to rebuild trust between residents and authorities. Meetings were held to discuss how to support those affected by addiction and how to maintain the progress achieved. This response showed a willingness within the community to engage rather than withdraw. The conversation shifted from fear toward responsibility. Media coverage played a role in shaping the perception of the operation's impact. Reports highlighted both the scale of the takedown and the statements from officials that promised continued vigilance. For viewers across the country, these images reinforced the idea that coordinated action could make a difference. At the same time, journalists included voices of residents who remained wary. This balanced portrayal reflected the reality of communities that have experienced change before without lasting impact. As days passed, the immediate shock of the raids gave way to a more measured assessment of their meaning. Law enforcement leaders continued to emphasize that safety is built over time, not delivered in a single morning. Patrol presence remained visible, reinforcing the message that attention would not fade. This steady follow-through was critical to maintaining public confidence. The operation became a reference point for future discussions about crime and response. For West Palm Beach, the public reaction marked a moment of alignment between authority and community. The combination of clear communication and visible action created space for cautious trust. Residents were reminded that organized crime thrives in silence, and that shared awareness can limit its reach. This understanding strengthened the operation's impact beyond immediate arrests. It also set expectations for accountability moving forward. As the city absorbed the aftermath of Operation Old School, attention began to turn toward what comes after enforcement, including long-term prevention and support efforts. The official statements and community responses formed a bridge between action and recovery, shaping the next phase of the story. With the arrests complete and public confidence cautiously restored, the focus now shifts to how authorities and residents will work together to prevent new networks from rising in the shadows. Operation Old School closed one of the most dangerous chapters in West Palm Beach's recent history, but it did not mark the end of the struggle that brought the operation into existence. What unfolded over months of investigation and a single decisive day of action was not simply a series of arrests, but the collapse of a criminal organization that had embedded itself into the drug economy of the region for years. By removing leadership, distribution networks, and financial resources simultaneously, law enforcement disrupted a system that thrived on silence and fear. The impact extended far beyond courtrooms and evidence rooms, affecting neighborhoods that had endured constant pressure. This operation demonstrated how organized crime can grow when left unchecked, but it also showed how patient coordination can dismantle structures that appear untouchable. The investigation did not chase small victories or quick headlines because its goal was to break a cycle rather than pause it. For residents, this approach mattered, since many had seen previous cases fade without lasting change. Operation Old School demonstrated that sustained effort can reach deep enough to change the balance, even against networks built to survive pressure. At the same time, the outcome carried a clear message that enforcement alone cannot solve the drug crisis. The supply chain was disrupted, but demand remains a challenge that touches families, schools, and workplaces across Palm Beach County. Community awareness, early reporting, and support for prevention programs remain critical parts of the response. When residents stay alert and engaged, organized groups lose the space they rely on to rebuild. The fight against drugs is not won in a single operation, but through constant attention and shared responsibility. In the days following the operation, local reporting captured scenes that reflected both relief and caution. Streets once associated with quiet dealing returned to regular routines, while residents spoke about feeling safer, yet aware that vigilance must continue. These voices highlighted a common understanding that progress can be fragile. The absence of visible crime does not guarantee permanent change, especially in regions affected by synthetic drugs. This perspective grounded the operation's success in reality rather than optimism. Law enforcement agencies echoed this caution in their closing statements, emphasizing that the operation was part of a broader strategy rather than a final answer. They warned that criminal networks adapt quickly and search for new openings when pressure eases. Continued cooperation between agencies and communities was presented as the most vigorous defense against this shift. The message was firm and direct, reinforcing that safety depends on consistency rather than momentary victories. As West Palm Beach moves forward, Operation Old School stands as both a milestone and a reminder. It showed what is possible when patience, coordination, and community awareness align, but it also underlined the long road ahead. The story ends not with celebration, but with vigilance, as residents and authorities remain watchful against the return of the same threats under new forms. The operation closed one door on organized drug crime, and the future will depend on how firmly the community keeps it shut.